Hello everyone, this is Ukraine Media Center at Ukraine Forum, and right now we will be discussing the beginning of the academic year in Ukraine. We understand that this year there are many challenges, and we will be discussing these challenges right now with the Educational Ombudsman of Ukraine, Serhii Gorbachov. Hello, Serhii. We understand that this academic year will begin for our children. What are the challenges and how are we going to deal with them? Well, the first and the only thing we can be sure about is the fact that nothing is sure. The situation is complicated and unpredictable. There is aggression, but there is huge migration of our children in the country and abroad. And there are many educational challenges in the temporarily occupied territories or territories with active armed conflict. So these challenges are challenging not only for the students but also for the teachers. And the most worrying component right now is the component of safety. There are many discussions about the beginning of the academic year, whether it's going to be online or offline, whether the shelters are sufficient and schools and to protect the children and teachers in case of air raids. According to the data we have from the educational facilities, there are 30% of such schools. According to the State Emergency Service, there are 12% of such schools. So according to the data of our service, according to the service on the quality of education and the data of the regional administrations, we can see that there are 50 to 60% of parents who are unsure of safety of children at school and thus are preferring online education. So this number is really worrying. Of course, there are objective reasons behind it, but I also believe it's very important for us to have in-person education wherever possible. And looking into the situation right now, I would kindly request the teachers and also the educators and everyone to start in-person education, especially for the primary school from the first to the fourth year. They are very vulnerable to the challenges of online education, and the experience of COVID-19 gave us lots of data, and without this experience, the current situation would be even more difficult. But we also understand that we need to draw some lessons from that experience and restructure the real mechanisms of online education. Thus, it is very important for me that during this summer, the State Emergency Service, together with regional administrations, have audited the schools, and now each school has to have the conclusion on whether it is ready for resuming offline education. Not everywhere can we see a bomb shelter because we were not getting ready for this, and it's very important to be very honest with each other, with the parents. If we can see that by September 1st, the bomb shelter cannot be made available in the school. We need to look for some opportunities in the nearby buildings, but also another option is to clearly communicate to the parents that we will have online education. We have very good resources for this. We have the All Ukrainian School online, and I can tell this as a professional teacher. But also there is a challenge of formalization and legalization of this remote education. So our children need to be able to legalize this result by getting some certificate confirming this education. Also, there is a big group of our children, the children who are abroad. They are in quite a worrying situation. According to the legislation of the countries they are in, they have to attend schools there. And we have recently heard the official statement that the Ukrainian children have to come back to Ukraine or attend schools in the countries they are in. That's the position we are surprised to hear. Our children are not there forever. It's not their decision and the decision of their parents to leave for other countries. It's very important for us to keep this connection with our children abroad. Unfortunately, a very small percentage of them have the possibility to study Ukrainian language, history, and literature. I have many people from abroad contacting us, and they have very similar requests. Their children go to school somewhere in Czech Republic, in Germany, wherever they are. They don't know the language. Well, in many cases, they don't. There are some adaptation programs. Sometimes they are good, but it still takes time for the child to adapt. If we want to keep our citizens, if we want to give them the chance to come back to Ukraine at some point, we need to make sure to keep this connection of our children with Ukraine. That's a huge problem, and it should be resolved through bilateral agreements. There is a proposal that has been discussed for quite some time, but for some reason it's not receiving the proper attention. So the idea is that the child attends the school in the country they are in, but also to have 2 or 3 hours during the day for online learning with Ukrainian teachers according to the Ukrainian curricula. It's not a 100% solution, but it will give the chance to stay in touch with our children, informing them about our history, language, and other school subjects. And are we ready to provide this training for 2 or 3 hours daily? Are we ready to provide online education to these children? Have we made our homework? Well, there is no one answer to this. Many schools have actually done this, so they are ready to work with our children online. But the problem is, when should they do? Because the timing of classes in the foreign school and in the Ukrainian school, they coincide. So there is a possibility to have some classes during the day. In many cases, the parents have not applied for their children to be transferred from their schools, and according to the Ukrainian legislation, it's impossible to make such transfer without the parents' application. except for the case when the child is in the ninth form. So maybe there needs to be some update in the regulation. So right now, the regulation and the requirement of the Ukrainian legislation is the same as it was before. So any kind of pressure on the part of schools is illegal and unethical. There should be the proper dialogue in the interests of our children. So you have mentioned one more challenge that we are facing our children in the temporarily occupied territories. What is the solution for them? Is the only solution to leave for the Ukrainian government-controlled territory, or if there is internet connection, can they study there? That's quite a painful question because we, the service of the Education Ombudsman, and me personally, we are getting lots of letters from people in the occupied territories. People write about terrible things. They are forced to collaborate with the occupiers. They are threatened with shooting, with execution. Sometimes people lose their homes, and people coming from Russia are given these homes instead. So, sorry that I'm starting from the teachers, but actually teachers are essential for education, especially in case of small teachers. We need to support people in the occupied territories. We need to support our colleagues. I strongly support the address of the president a couple of days ago to the people in the occupied territories. We have not forgotten them. It's very important. We are ready to support them in different ways. And the first way would be to ensure their possibility to exist. They are forced to work for the occupier. Otherwise, they would have no money to buy bread. And this is something we were discussing since day one of this open aggression. Once some city or town is occupied, people need to start getting 2/3 of their salary for the idle time. And also, speaking of the remote education for the people in the occupied territories, it's possible for the places where internet is available. There is Ukrainian School Online. There are online educational platforms. Availability of platforms like Google Class or Microsoft Team, etc., etc. But also I encourage teachers in the occupied territories to be very careful. We have huge losses among our educators, but we will only be able to catch up once those territories are liberated. We can compensate for the lack of knowledge or skills in the students, but we cannot compensate if the teacher dies. And here we have to be very clear in the definitions. In the Article 111, there is a definition of collaborationism with the enemy, but there is no discrimination between deliberate and forced collaboration. And we know that in many cases, this is exactly what is happening with teachers of forced collaboration. It's a very painful issue, and it's very important to keep their lives. The territories will be liberated, but it's impossible to bring the deceased back. One more question. This year, it was decided to introduce a national multiple subject test instead of the usual external assessment of knowledge. Well, yes, this was a very important experience. It showed us that even under such difficult conditions, we can take the proper measures. I'm not available for the comments about the results of the national multiple subject test, but we have seen that the process was organized quite well, and wherever our colleagues even faced the situation of error rate alerts at the time of this test, in all of these cases, it was completed, and we have managed to cope with the challenge. According to the primary information, the distribution of the results of the graduates is, in most cases, normal. So this test works for its main purpose, to give us data for the enrollment of students into the institutions of higher education. Okay, thank you, dear colleagues. Your questions? I'm Victoria Shevchenko, Ukrinform. I have two questions. The first one is about the regions that are the best and worst prepared for offline education. And the second question, is there any lack of educators in Ukraine, and how do they prepare for this new academic year? Well, as for your first question, I do not have the full information. I can only speak about the subjective attitude of the parents and their readiness for their children to study offline. We can see that the closer the place of readiness to the east, the less is the readiness to study offline. In Kharkiv, for instance, there will be only online education, and it is good because it would be irresponsible to do offline in that condition. The teachers are getting ready for the academic year quite actively. I know that in the nearest weeks, the schools have to make the decisions about the formats of education, making sure about the availability and the classes that can be taken offline. So there will be no single decision for entire Ukraine. Each school is specific in its circumstances. And your second question was about the lack of teachers. Okay. So, according to the data of the Ministry of Education, there are 22,000 teachers, which is about 5% of the 450,000 teachers in total. So there is no considerable lack of teachers, and it is good that some of them are abroad because they can work remotely. It is permitted by the legislation. The more noticeable problem is the territorial distribution of teachers in Ukraine. Many of them have left their original places of residence. They have left for the western regions of Ukraine, and in those regions there is surely no lack of teachers. And also the legislation provides for the possibility to resettle and find a job in the safer region. it is being done. We are providing the explanations about the procedures. So I do not expect to see any lack of teachers. And also the number of school-age children who are abroad right now are between 700,000 and 1.5 million, or about 50% of Ukrainian school children who are abroad. So we will have no lack of teacher. I'm Tatiana Litvinova from Espresso. What can you tell about institutions of higher education? What formats are they selecting for their education, and what would you suggest? I can see here in Kyiv that the majority are going to study online. Well, according to the legislation, institutions of higher education are autonomous. No one can impose anything on them. And speaking of the specific choices they make, the majority of them are making the decision for online education for one simple reason. They do not have bomb shelters in sufficient numbers and capacity, even if they have them. Can you imagine any major university with dozens of 1,000 students? So, of course, they do not have any bomb shelters to house all of them. So this decision is not very likable, but looking back at the research in the COVID times in Netherlands, in the UK, we can safely say that the older the person is, the more suitable online education is for them. And sometimes in the absence of any lockdowns or any kind of active hostilities, this online education is still used. So it's just the issue of how to put it into practice. I'm Pavlo Kovalchuk from ONN. Is this full-scale war another stimulus for the development of the Ukrainian online school in the same way as the pandemic stimulated it? I know that some work is underway to film additional lessons in different subjects. Well, yes, so this school has emerged as a response to COVID-19. You have rightly mentioned about this. So this tool was developed in December 2020, January 2021. It's been there for over a year, and there are lessons for classes 5 to 11. But as far as I know, the work for the primary school content is stopped. And Mr. Karandi, as far as I am aware, who was the driver of this process, has now left his office. I truly hope that this platform or this resource will be used. It's very important to have classes in this system. So it's the functionality that's already there, and it needs to be expanded so that there could be a class of children who get their marks, and based on that, they could get their certificates. Well, I know that many people in the education are afraid of the development of such platforms. I understand that this is a modern solution, but teachers are afraid that some of them may lose their jobs because of that. Can you confirm or disprove that? Well, I would just encourage the teachers to learn. You know, this use of online education, this is a necessary professional prerequisite of any person in the education. I do not believe that there is a mass belief of the kind you have mentioned. Many people actually enjoy these new tools because they enable additional opportunities for communication with the students. I, as a teacher, have been using Google Class even prior to the pandemic, and I truly hope that Ukrainian school online will have the same functionality. So as an experienced person, I do not see any huge differences between offline and online lessons, and the teachers have to learn each day, otherwise they're losing their professional level. Maybe this sounds worrying to some people, but this is what I firmly believe. Teachers have to keep learning all the time. Thank you. This was Serhii Gorbachov, the Education Ombudsman of Ukraine. Thank you so much. And our next briefing is going to take place at 2:30. We will have here Roman Slastion, the director of the Ukrainian Agribusiness Club. We will be discussing the exports and storage of grain.